The day Adaeze Okonkwo turned 60, nobody came. Not her sister, not her neighbors, not the women from church who always had something to say about everyone else's lives, but never something kind to say about hers. Not even the young man who sold akara outside her gate every morning and always smiled when she bought 2 extra pieces. Nobody came. She sat alone at her kitchen table in her small but clean house in Lekki, Lagos, with a single cupcake she had bought for herself from the bakery down the road. 1 candle. 60 years reduced to 1 small flame, flickering in the afternoon breeze that came through the open window. She stared at that flame for a long time. She didn't blow it out. She watched it burn all the way down on its own, because that was how her life had felt. Not extinguished by one dramatic moment, not destroyed by one terrible event, just slowly, quietly, steadily burned down by years of being overlooked, years of being pitied, years of being seen as a woman whose story had already ended before it truly began. Adaeze was not an ordinary woman. Anyone who spent more than 10 minutes in her presence knew that. She had a mind like a surgeon's scalpel, precise, thoughtful, and unflinching. She had a laugh that could fill a room even when she tried to keep it small. She had wisdom, the kind that only comes from a life fully lived, fully felt, and fully survived. She had survived poverty, survived loneliness, survived the particular cruelty that the world reserves for women it has decided are no longer useful. But none of that mattered to the world. Because 35 years ago, a doctor in a government hospital, tired, overworked, and careless, had looked at her test results and told her the words that would define the next 4 decades of her life. You cannot have children. Your womb is irreparably damaged. I'm sorry. He had not been sorry. He had moved on to the next patient before she had finished crying. And the diagnosis, wrong as it turned out decades later, but by then it no longer mattered, had spread through her community the way poison spreads through water. Slowly, invisibly, completely. She was 25 when it happened. She was beautiful then, the kind of beautiful that made men stop mid-sentence. She had suitors. She had options. She had a future that felt wide and golden and full. She had the particular radiance that belongs to women who don't yet know what the world is planning for them. An open, unarmed brightness that the world would spend the next 3.5 decades trying to dim. Then the rumor went out. Adaeze cannot have children, and one by one, like lights going off in a city before a blackout, the men disappeared. The cruelest thing about that kind of community rumor is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come to your door like a bill to be paid. It moves underneath things. It travels in the spaces between words. In the sudden hesitation before someone's mother speaks, in the way a man who used to call 3 times a week begins to call twice, then once, then not at all. You feel the disappearance before you understand its cause. You spend months wondering if it is something you said, something you wore, something you failed to be. And by the time you understand what has actually happened, the damage is already complete. The verdict has already been handed down without a trial. Adaeze had understood it fully on the day she overheard 2 women at the market talking about her, without knowing she was around the corner. Not unkind women, not malicious women. Women who were simply doing what people do with information about other people, processing it out loud, arranging it into a story that made sense of the world. That Adaeze Okonkwo, one of them said in Igbo, such a fine girl. It's a pity about her condition. These things happen, the other said. She should have married quickly when she had the chance. She still has a chance, but men want families. True, men want families. She had stood around the corner of that market stall for 3 full minutes before she could make herself move, and then she had walked home with her groceries and her dignity both held very carefully, and she had gone inside and sat in her kitchen and decided 2 things. First, she was not going to spend her life performing grief for an audience. She would feel it when she needed to feel it, in her own house, on her own terms. She would not let the world's version of her tragedy become her own. Second, she was going to build something. She did not know yet what it would be, but she was going to build something that would last longer than the rumor, stand taller than the pity, and prove, if only to herself, that a woman's life was not a building that required someone else's foundation. She had gone back to school the following year and finished her architectural degree with distinction. But the loneliness was real. She would not pretend it wasn't. The first one, Emmanuel, who had been courting her seriously for 2 years, sat across from her in a restaurant and told her with genuine regret in his eyes that his mother needed grandchildren and he could not disappoint his mother. He had married someone else 6 months later. His mother got 5 grandchildren. The second one wanted financial companionship. He needed someone to help him build his business, someone with Adaeze's connections and intelligence, but he would keep a second wife for family purposes. She had thrown a glass of water in his face and walked out of that restaurant with her head high. The third had wanted something else entirely. He had pursued her with tenderness and poetry and late-night phone calls for almost a year before revealing that what he really wanted was a sophisticated woman to entertain his business associates, someone cultured enough for dinner parties but with no claim on his future. She had ended that quietly, alone, weeping into her pillow at 2 a.m. By the time she was 35, the kind of men who approached her had changed entirely. They were men who wanted nurses, men who wanted cooks, men who wanted someone to manage their households with quiet efficiency while they lived their real lives elsewhere. They approached her with a specific kind of respect, the kind people show to someone they find useful but do not love. She let them try. She tried to love them. She tried to mold herself into what they needed, thinking that usefulness was the closest thing to belonging that she would ever find. It never worked, because Adaeze was too whole to pretend to be a fragment, and slowly, so slowly she barely felt it happening, the world began to treat her as though her chapter was already written. Women her age would touch her arm with pitying eyes at church and say, "God has a plan," in the voice people use when they mean, "There is no plan, but I don't want to say it." Younger women would ask her for advice on their marriages with the unconscious condescension of people consulting a library, grateful for the information but not planning to stay. Her colleagues at the architectural firm where she worked respected her professionally. She had become one of the finest structural architects in Lagos over 3 decades, known for her meticulous eye and her uncanny ability to see what others missed. Her work was everywhere, in the bones of buildings that would outlast everyone who had ever doubted her. But at the year-end parties, she sat at the edge of conversations. At the retirement celebrations, someone always mentioned family in her presence and then went quiet with embarrassment. She had learned to exist in the gaps, in the spaces between what people wanted her to be and what she actually was. 60 years of that. 60 years of being strong because there was no one to be strong for her. And now a cupcake with a burned-out candle. She picked it up and ate it slowly, standing at her window, watching the street below where life moved and swirled and never stopped for anyone. God, she said quietly, the way she always talked to him, like a woman who had long given up on theatrics, but had never given up on the conversation itself. I don't know what you're doing. I've never known. But I'm still here. Whatever that means. She washed her plate. She went to bed. She did not know that in 48 hours her life was going to detonate. Before we continue, I just want to take a moment to say thank you. We recently crossed an incredible milestone of 3,000 subscribers, and honestly, I'm still amazed by the love and support this channel keeps receiving. Every view, every comment, every like, and every subscription means more than you know. This particular story was created to celebrate that milestone with all of you because you've become more than viewers. You've become family. And if you've been enjoying these stories but haven't subscribed yet, this is the perfect time to join us. It's completely free, and it helps us bring you more powerful stories like this one. Trust me, this story only gets better from here. The ending is something you won't see coming, so make sure you stay with me until the very end. Now let's get back to Adaeze's story. His name was Seo Jin-ho, and he was the kind of man that entire cities whispered about. In Seoul, they called him Jeomeon Hanil, the Black Sky. The name came from the way he operated, above everyone, blocking out the light for anyone who stood against him, and utterly silent before a storm. He was 44 years old, the head of the SEO crime organization, which had spent 3 generations building a network so vast and so deeply embedded in Asian business, finance, and politics that distinguishing it from legitimate enterprise had become nearly impossible. He was also breathtakingly intelligent, the kind of intelligent that made people uncomfortable. He could walk into a meeting having read every person's psychological profile beforehand and within 5 minutes know exactly which pressure point to press. He had started running the organization at 31 after his father's sudden death, and within 4 years had tripled its holdings and eliminated every internal threat with the quiet precision of a chess master who plays 10 moves ahead and shows no emotion when he wins. He had been called cold, ruthless, incapable of genuine human connection. The women who had tried to reach him would have agreed. There had been many. Heiresses who wore his net worth like perfume and made brilliant conversation at dinner and looked at him from across tables with the specific hunger of women who wanted to be the one who cracked open the black sky and found something soft inside. Models who photographed beautifully on his arm at charity events and tried to make him jealous and found, disconcertingly, that they could not. A world-class cellist who had spent 8 months trying to teach him to feel music, who had played for him alone in her apartment, private concerts of extraordinary beauty, watching his face for something, anything. She had told him on the last night that being with him felt like playing to an empty hall. She hadn't been wrong. He had not been unkind to her. He had simply been incapable of receiving what she was giving. None of them had reached him, not because he didn't try. He had, in his way. He had bought gifts chosen with genuine thought. He had made time in schedules that had no room for making time. He had done everything that was supposed to work. But there was a place inside him, the place where warmth is supposed to live, that had gone cold so long ago. He had stopped looking for it. He had begun to suspect it was simply not there, not damaged, absent, that perhaps he was one of those people who existed as a function rather than a feeling, useful to the world in measurable ways, but ultimately solitary by design. His father had been a brutal man, not in the operatic way of villains in stories, but in the precise administrative way of men who believe love is a weakness and demonstrate it consistently. His mother had disappeared when he was 9. Not died, disappeared, which was worse in the way that unanswered questions are always worse than hard truths. He had been raised in the organization as its future, with discipline, with strategy, with the understanding that sentiment was a weapon your enemies used against you. By the time he was old enough to need warmth, he had been comprehensively trained to function without it. He had come to Lagos on business. SEO Corporation had major holdings in Nigerian real estate and infrastructure. Legitimate holdings, carefully maintained as a clean front for the less visible parts of the operation. There was a construction project in trouble, a building in Victoria Island whose structural plans had been signed off by someone who clearly had no idea what they were doing. 3 floors had shown early-stage compromise. The project manager was panicking. Jin-ho's Nigerian representative had called him personally. "We need the best architect in Lagos, immediately. Someone who can look at this and tell us the truth, not what we want to hear." The name that came up from 3 separate sources, independently, was Adaeze Okonkwo. She was on a ladder when they arrived. Jin-ho had driven to the site himself, which was not typical. He usually sent people, but he had a particular habit. When something was important, he went himself. He did not trust second-hand information about first-hand problems. He stepped out of the black Mercedes and looked up at the half-finished building with the practiced eye of a man who had spent decades understanding how power structures worked, both in organizations and apparently in steel and concrete. Then he saw her. She was at the top of a 12-foot ladder, one hand gripping the frame, the other holding a tablet, looking at something in the ceiling of the 3rd floor with an expression of total focus. She was in a white hard hat, work trousers, and a yellow safety vest. She was 60 years old, and she moved with the unhurried confidence of a woman who had been doing this for longer than most people on that site had been alive. "The rebar spacing is wrong," she said to the engineer standing below her, not looking down. "Someone changed the specification during construction and didn't update the load calculations. This whole section needs to be reassessed before you pour another inch of concrete." The engineer below her was sweating. Jin-ho's project manager hurried forward to greet Jin-ho, but Jin-ho raised a hand to stop him. He kept watching her. She came down the ladder with the same unhurried confidence she'd gone up with. She pulled off her hard hat, and her silver-streaked locks, natural, magnificent, and entirely unbothered, tumbled around her shoulders. She turned around and came face to face with a man she did not recognize, dressed in a suit that cost more than her first car, with the stillest eyes she had ever seen in a human face. She did not blink. "Are you the owner?" she asked directly. "Yes," Jin-ho said. "Then you need to hear something uncomfortable." She didn't wait for permission. "Your construction manager approved changes to the structural plan that should never have been approved. The modifications to the 3rd floor load-bearing framework have created a potential cascade failure scenario. If you had proceeded with the next pour, you would have been looking at a partial collapse within 18 to 24 months, possibly sooner in heavy rain. 3 people made decisions on this site without the authority or the knowledge to make them." Silence. Jin-ho looked at her for a long moment. "How certain are you?" "Completely. You haven't seen the full drawings." "I've seen enough. Send me the full drawings and I'll give you a written report by tomorrow morning." Around them, the site had gone quiet. Engineers were watching. The project manager looked like he was considering disappearing into the concrete itself. Jin-ho studied her face. It was the face of someone who had never once in her professional life felt the need to soften the truth because someone with money was in the room. He felt something strange. Not attraction. Not yet. Something more fundamental. A kind of recognition. The way you recognize a material that is genuinely strong because it does not flex under pressure. "You'll have the full drawings within the hour," he said. She nodded and put her hard hat back on. She turned back to the ladder without any further ceremony. He stood there watching her go back up, and for the first time in years, someone had surprised him. She delivered the report at 6 the next morning. Not by email. She came herself in person with a printed bound copy and a digital version and a presentation she had clearly worked on through the night because it was 47 pages and included 3-dimensional modeled projections of the failure scenarios and a step-by-step remediation plan with cost estimates and timeline. Jin-ho received it in the hotel suite where he had set up a temporary office. He was already awake. He rarely slept more than 4 hours. He looked at the report, then at her, then back at the report. He spent 20 minutes reading it in silence while she sat across from him and drank the coffee his assistant had brought, looking out at the Lagos skyline with the calm of a woman who had nothing to prove. "This is the most comprehensive structural assessment I have ever received," he said finally. "It's what the situation required," she said simply. "You worked through the night." "I work through the night when the work needs it. That's not remarkable." He looked at her again. That look, steady, evaluating, not unkind, but also not warm. "Have dinner with me tonight," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Are you offering me a contract or a social engagement?" "Both, potentially. I want to discuss the remediation project. I'd also like to continue this conversation in a less official context." She considered him for a moment. "Mr. Seo, I have been in this industry for 30 years. I know what it means when a powerful man says he wants to continue a conversation in a less official context." A pause. "I'm offering you a professional dinner," he said, and there was something in his voice that was almost rueful. "Nothing else. I don't do anything else poorly, and I wouldn't insult you with it." She studied his face. Then she nodded once. 7 o'clock. Somewhere that serves good jol of rice. I'm not eating fusion on a workday." For the first time in a very long time, Seo Jin-ho almost smiled. They talked for 4 hours. It began as a professional discussion about the building, costs, timelines, the legal exposure, whether Jin-ho should pursue the construction manager who had approved the unauthorized changes. Adaeze was clinical and thorough and had clearly already thought about every angle. But somewhere around the second hour, the conversation shifted. He asked her how she'd gotten into structural architecture, not with the polite curiosity people use to fill silence, but with the real kind, the kind that leans forward slightly. She told him about the father who had built furniture by hand and talked about the beauty of things that held weight, about the engineering textbooks she had read in secret because her secondary school teachers told her sciences were for the boys, about the scholarship she had won that nobody in her family believed she would win, about 30 years of proving herself in a room that was not built for her. He listened the way someone listens when they're not waiting for their turn to speak. "You never married," he said. It was not quite a question. She looked at him steadily. "I didn't find the right person." "Is that the full story?" A pause. She picked up her water glass. "Put it down." "No, but it's the version I'm comfortable telling a man I met 2 days ago." He respected that, nodded, moved on. He told her about soul, about the business, the legitimate version, which was still extraordinary, about the particular loneliness of being the person everyone in a room defers to, about how he had spent his life building power and had recently begun to wonder what the power was for. She looked at him then with something that was not pity and not admiration, but something more honest than either, recognition. "You've been surrounded by people who need something from you," she said. "That's a specific kind of alone. It's louder than ordinary loneliness, but it cuts deeper." He went very still. "Yes," he said quietly. The restaurant had emptied around them. The staff were hovering discreetly. Neither of them had noticed. "I'm going to offer you the full remediation contract," he said eventually. "Your firm. Thank you. Will do excellent work." "I know." A pause. "Can I ask you something direct?" "You can ask. Are you happy?" She looked out the window at the Lagos night. The traffic had died down. The city was doing that brief, beautiful thing it sometimes did at 11 o'clock, where it sounded almost quiet. "I am more at peace than I have ever been," she said carefully. "Peace and happiness are not the same thing. I have learned to be grateful for peace." He looked at her for a long moment. "What would make you happy?" he asked. She turned back to him, and something in her face, some held door, shifted just slightly. "To be chosen," she said simply. "Not needed, not useful. Chosen." The silence that followed those words was the most honest silence either of them had sat in for years. The remediation project lasted 6 weeks. In those 6 weeks, Jin-ho found reasons to be at the site almost every day. His security team noticed. His personal assistant noticed. His representative in Lagos, a sharp woman named Mrs. Park, noticed most of all, and she was alarmed because she had worked for Seo Jin-ho for 11 years, and she had never seen him find reasons to be anywhere that wasn't strategically necessary. He and Adaeze fell into a rhythm, Morning coffee reviews of the previous day's progress, long conversations that started as professional briefings and slowly, like water finding the shape of stone, became something else. He learned that she sang to herself while she worked, old Igbo songs her grandmother had taught her. She learned that he could not pass a bookstore without going in, and that he read in 3 languages and had opinions about architecture that were remarkably sophisticated for someone who had never studied it. She made him laugh 3 times in the first week, once when she calmly told his most aggressive security guard that his aggressive stance was compensating for something, and the guard had been so startled he had stepped back 2 full feet. Once when she described, with complete deadpan seriousness, a client who had asked her to design a building shaped like his own face. And once, the laugh that surprised him most, when he had tried to explain something technical to her and she had let him finish the entire explanation before saying, "Yes, I know. I wrote a paper on that mechanism in 2009. It won an award." Laughter was not something he had experienced often, not real laughter, not the kind that sneaks up on you before you've defended against it. He brought her things, not flowers. He knew instinctively that flowers would be wrong, too soft, too easily dismissed. He brought her a first edition of a structural engineering text she had once mentioned. He brought her jollof rice from a place she had said she loved when they were driving past it one afternoon. He brought her, once, a silence. He had found her sitting on a pile of materials after a difficult conversation with a subcontractor, and he had simply sat next to her and said nothing for 15 minutes, and she had looked at him afterward with an expression he couldn't fully read. He recognized what was happening. He tried to stop it, not because of her, because of what he was, because of what his world contained, because men in his position had people who watched them and people who needed from them and people who would use everything they touched against them, because he was 44 and she was 60, and the world would have things to say about that in volumes, because she deserved better than his complications. He tried to create professional distance. He sent his representative to the next 3 site meetings instead of going himself. On the 4th day of his absence, she called him. "Something's wrong with the southwestern load column calculations," she said when he answered. "I need your eyes on this." He knew she didn't need his eyes. She didn't need anyone's eyes. She had more architectural eyes than everyone on that project combined. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. He was there in 15. She was standing at the column when he arrived, tablet in hand, and she didn't look up when he approached. But when he was standing beside her, close enough to see what she was looking at, she said quietly, without turning her head, "You don't have to stay away from me to protect me. I'm not fragile." He was quiet for a long time. "I know," he said finally, then stopped doing it. He looked at the column. He looked at her profile. He thought about all the things he should say. All the reasonable, careful, responsible things. All the reasons this was complicated. All the ways he could hurt her without meaning to. What he actually said was, "Have dinner with me on Saturday, not a work dinner." She turned her head and looked at him. "Not a work dinner," she repeated carefully. "No." She studied his face for a moment, then she turned back to the column. "Saturday," she said, "don't be late." There are things that happen in darkness that cannot stay in darkness. In the 3rd week of the project, Adaeze received a visit. She was at her office in Victoria Island, her real office, the architectural firm she had run for 22 years, when the receptionist called to say there were 2 men downstairs who said they were from Seo Corporation and needed to speak with her privately. She assumed it was about the project. She said to send them up. They were not from Seo Corporation. They were from a man named Choi Dae-won. And if Seo Jin-ho was the black sky, Choi Dae-won was the thing that lived in the darkest part of it. He was Jin-ho's oldest rival. They had grown up in adjacent organizations. They had fought over territory, over money, over influence, for the better part of 15 years. And Choi had been watching Jin-ho's unusual attachment to a Lagos architect with very great interest. The two men sat across from her. They were polite. They were almost gentle. That made it worse. "We know Mr. Seo has become personally involved with you," the older man said. "We want you to understand the risk that places you in." Adaeze looked at them evenly. "I'm going to need you to be very specific." "Mr. Choi would like to make you an offer. Walk away from the project. End whatever personal arrangement you have with Seo Jin-ho. In return, we will deposit $5 million into any account you specify, and you will never see us again." The silence in the room was absolute. Adaeze folded her hands on her desk. She looked at the men for a long, measured moment. "Get out of my office," she said quietly. "Mrs. Okonkwo—" "I said get out." Her voice did not rise. It did not shake. It became, if anything, quieter. "I have been 60 years on this earth. I have survived things that would rearrange your understanding of fear. I have rebuilt from nothing twice, and I have never, not once, been bought." She stood up. "If either of you enters this building again, I will call every regulatory authority in Lagos, and I will personally make sure that whatever you are covering with those suits becomes very publicly uncovered. Now get out." They got out. She sat back down after they left, and for a long time she did not move, not because she was afraid, but because she understood now what she was inside. She picked up her phone. She called Jin-ho. "I need to see you," she said when he answered. "Tonight. There's something you need to know." He heard something in her voice that made him put down everything he was holding. "I'm on my way," he said. She told him everything. He listened without interruption. His face showed nothing. That stillness she had come to recognize as the surface of something deep and controlled. But his hands, she noticed, had gone very flat on the table. The way hands go flat when they're working, not to make fists. When she finished, he said, "Are you frightened?" "No," she said honestly. "I'm angry. There's a difference." Something in his face shifted, a small, almost imperceptible shift. "You called me," he said. "Yes. Not the police, not your family, me." She looked at him directly. "You are the most relevant person to call when someone sends messengers because of their relationship with you. That's practical reasoning." "It is. Is there another reason?" A pause. Honest Adaeze, who had spent 60 years telling the truth because she had found lying exhausting, looked at the man across from her and decided that this moment, this particular crossing, deserved to be fully crossed. "I trust you," she said simply. "I don't know entirely why yet, but I do." Jin-ho looked at her for a long time. The Lagos night pressed against the windows of the restaurant. Somewhere outside, a generator hummed its steady Lagos song. "Adaeze," he said. And it was the first time he had used her first name without a professional prefix, and it landed in the space between them like a stone dropped into still water. There are things about my life that are not simple, that are not safe, that could make your life complicated in ways you cannot fully imagine from where you're sitting. "I know that," she said. And yet, she agreed. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, not dramatically, quietly, the way you reach for something you've been trying not to want for a long time. "I will not let anything happen to you," he said. She turned her hand over under his and held his hand back. "I know that too," she said. It was not a fast romance. It was not full of declarations and grand gestures and the kind of cinematic moments people choreograph for social media. It was Sunday mornings when he would come to her house and she would make a kara and they would sit on her veranda and talk about everything and nothing for hours. He had never, before this, sat with someone in comfortable silence. He had spent his life filling silences. With strategy, with analysis, with the relentless forward motion of a man who was afraid of what might rise up if he stopped. With Adaeze, the silence was the point. The silence was where the real conversation lived. It was the way he had started learning Igbo phrases from YouTube videos and then tried them on her, halting, over-precise, with the specific dignity of a man who never half-does anything. And she had laughed until she had to sit down. He had not been embarrassed. He had laughed with her. That was the thing. He laughed with her. Not politely, not performatively, but with his whole face in a way that made his security team visible uncomfortable the first time they witnessed it. It was the way she never tried to manage him. Every woman in his life had tried to manage him in some way. Even the ones who loved him had tried to smooth him, moderate him, make him more palatable for the world. Adaeze simply looked at him. She accepted what she saw without trying to redecorate it. She disagreed with him directly when she disagreed. She told him he was wrong when he was wrong, with the complete calm of a woman who has nothing to prove and everything to say. And something in him, that locked, ancient, defended something, breathed. It was the text she sent him at 2 a.m. during a week when he was in Seoul handling a crisis. "You don't have to tell me how it's going. I'm just checking that you ate." 4 words of care that asked nothing in return, expected nothing, and somehow said more than every love letter he had ever received combined. He called her for 20 minutes. He didn't talk about the crisis. She didn't ask. They talked about a book she was reading and a building she had designed in 2004 that she had passed recently and found herself proud of, and whether it was normal to feel nostalgic for one's own work. He got off the phone and sat in his Seoul office at 2 a.m., feeling something he did not immediately have a name for. He sat with it for a while, turning it over. Then he realized he felt rested, not physically, emotionally. He had spent 20 minutes with another person and emerged from it more full than he'd gone in, rather than more depleted. In his experience, that did not happen. People took from him. It was the nature of who he was and what he had, but she had simply given attention, given lightness, given herself for 20 minutes with no invoice attached. He called her back. "What?" she said, slightly alarmed. "Did something happen?" "Nothing happened," he said. "I just wanted to say, thank you." For what? He thought about how to answer that. He thought about all the precise and articulate ways he might explain the specific architecture of what she was doing to him and how it worked. "For being you," he said. A brief silence. "Go to sleep, Jin-ho," she said, and he could hear the smile in it. She met his personal assistant, Mrs. Park, during a formal site review, and within 20 minutes, Mrs. Park had decided Adaeze Okonkwo was the most remarkable person she had encountered in 11 years of working for exceptional people. She reported this to Jin-ho with a formality that masked what was clearly profound, personal approval, and Jin-ho had said nothing but had looked out his hotel window with an expression Mrs. Park had never seen on his face before. It was softer than anything she had seen on that face. It was the expression of a man who has just realized he is lost in a place he does not want to leave. She saw it once, his other world. It was an evening when she had come to the hotel for a dinner meeting and had arrived to find 3 men she had never seen before in the hallway outside his suite, and the tension in the air was the specific kind that lives just underneath violence. 2 of the men had the flat, watchful eyes of people who have spent their lives calculating risk. The third was speaking to Jin-ho in rapid Korean, and whatever he was saying had drawn Jin-ho's face into an expression Adaeze had never seen. Not anger. Something older than anger. Something that had been learned so early it had become architecture. Jin-ho had looked up when he heard her, seen her, and something moved in his face, fast like a fish glimpsed through dark water. He had redirected her to a different floor, a different room, murmured something to his security in Korean, and rejoined her 20 minutes later with perfect composure. He had not explained, but his hands had been tense. "Do you want to tell me?" she asked after dinner. "Not tonight," he said. "All right. You're not going to press?" "You'll tell me when you're ready. I'm not going anywhere." He had looked at her then with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the expression that appeared on his face when she did something that caught him entirely off guard, something that made him recalibrate. "Most people in my world," he said slowly, "either want to know everything so they can use it, or refuse to know anything so they can claim innocence. You're the first person who has simply waited." "I've had 60 years to learn patience," she said lightly. "No," he said seriously, "it's not patience. It's trust. You're trusting me to come to you in my own time." He paused. "Do you know how rare that is?" She looked at him, and for the first time in this conversation, the first time in weeks actually, she saw something in his eyes that she had not seen before. Not warmth. Warmth was too simple a word. Need. Real, deep, unguarded need. The kind that has been buried so long it comes to the surface with the particular rawness of something unearthed, blinking, disoriented, terrifyingly alive. She reached across and touched his face, very lightly, the way you touch something precious that you've only just been trusted to hold. "I know," she said softly. He closed his eyes, and for a man who had spent 15 years making sure no one could see inside him, that was everything. Choi Daewon did not accept no gracefully. The attack came on a Tuesday night, and it was not on Adaeze directly. Choi was too calculated for something so crude. Instead, it was on her firm. Her files were hacked, stolen. 18 years of proprietary structural designs she had built this firm's reputation on, were leaked to competitors. A false report was filed with the regulatory authority accusing her of fraudulent practice on 3 government projects. Her bank accounts were temporarily frozen. By Wednesday morning, Adaeze Okonkwo's firm was in crisis. By Wednesday afternoon, 2 of her major clients had called to express regret and suspend their contracts pending the investigation. By Wednesday evening, she was sitting in her office alone, looking at 30 years of work being dismantled in real time, and she was still, that particular stillness of someone who has not yet decided whether to cry. Jin-ho arrived at 9 p.m. He had learned about it through his own channels before she had called him, and he had already set things in motion. His legal team, his security people, his tech specialist who had started tracing the hack within hours. He came in and sat across from her without preamble. She looked at him. "This is because of me," he said. "Yes." "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize. Tell me what you're going to do about it." Something fierce crossed his face. Not anger, something colder than anger. The black sky version of him, the part she had seen glimpses of but never fully. "I'm going to take Choi Daewon apart," he said quietly, "piece by piece. By the time I'm done, he won't be able to operate a food stall in Seoul." She looked at him steadily. "And my firm? The hack is traceable. My people are already on it. The regulatory complaint will be withdrawn within 48 hours. I have enough information about who filed it to make sure of that. Your accounts will be unfrozen by Friday. The clients who suspended, I'll make sure they receive the full exculpatory evidence." She sat back in her chair. She was quiet for a moment. "Jin-ho," she said, "I am not a woman who needs to be saved. I know. But I am a woman who knows that sometimes saving and partnership look the same. Yes." She stood up. She came around the desk and stood in front of him. He stood too. He always stood when she moved toward him, some instinct he had never examined. "Don't do anything that costs you too much," she said. "This firm is 22 years of my life. But you are—" She stopped. He looked at her. "You are something I thought I was done hoping for," she said quietly. "Don't become a casualty of protecting me." He reached up and held her face in both his hands, and she could feel the controlled energy in them. All that power, all that ferocity, held with such deliberate gentleness. "I have been running things alone for 15 years, he said. "I have never had anything I needed to protect. Do you understand what it means to me to have something I need to protect? She understood. She put her hands over his. What Jin-ho did to Choi Daewon over the following 3 weeks was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was the kind of dismantling that people in that world describe with a kind of horrified respect, systematic, thorough, and complete. He did not use violence. He was more sophisticated than that. He used information. He had 11 years of accumulated intelligence on Choi Daewon's operations, the financial structures, the key players, the buried skeletons. He released what needed to be released to the right people at exactly the right moments. A regulator here, an international authority there, a business partner who had been waiting for justification to change allegiances. Within 3 weeks, Choi Daewon's primary financial network collapsed. 2 of his senior lieutenants flipped. The South Korean Financial Authority launched a formal investigation that would take 3 years to fully unfold, but would effectively make Choi untouchable in the business world. He was not imprisoned, not yet. Jin-ho was not naive about timing, but he was finished as a power player, and he knew it. Adaeze's firm was fully exonerated. The regulatory complaint was officially retracted with an apology from the filing body. The clients returned, 2 of them apologetically. The stolen files were traced, the source was exposed, and she filed criminal charges that would take time, but that had been designed by Jin-ho's legal team to be ironclad. Her firm came through it, damaged, but standing. She stood in her office on the day everything was restored and looked around at the drawings on her walls, the models on her shelves, the 30 years of work that had tried to be taken from her and had not succeeded, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not just peace, something bigger than peace. She called Jin-ho. "Thank you," she said when he answered. "You did most of it yourself. You refused to fall apart." "We did it together," she said. A pause. "Adaeze," he said, "I need to talk to you, in person, tonight." Something in his voice made her stomach tighten slightly. "All right. There's something I've been trying to decide how to say. Say it simply," she said. "I've never been good with preamble." He came to her house. This was the first time he had come to her house. Truly come, not passing by, not a brief stop. He had dinner with her at her kitchen table in her home, surrounded by her books and her drawings and the small, beautiful life she had built entirely by herself. He looked around the house and she saw him taking it in. Not the cost of things, but the character of them. The way the bookshelf was organized, the technical drawings on the walls that were also, somehow, beautiful. The small garden visible through the kitchen window where she grew things that had no practical purpose except loveliness. After dinner, they sat on the veranda. The Lagos night was warm and full of sound, generators, distant music, the specific urban symphony that Lagos conducts every night with complete disregard for anyone's preference. "I've been thinking about my life," he said. She waited. "I've been thinking about what it has been and what it hasn't been and what I want the next chapter to be." He looked at her steadily. "I've been thinking about you. Specifically, I've been thinking about you and what it would mean to ask you something that I have no right to ask." "Ask it," she said. "I want you to marry me." The Lagos night continued its symphony, indifferent and magnificent. Adaeze looked at the man sitting across from her. This complicated, powerful, quietly broken, gradually healing man who had arrived in her life 48 days ago and somehow turned it sideways. And she felt 60 years of her life rise up in her chest at once. Every year, every dinner she had eaten alone, every moment someone had looked at her with pity, every candle she had blown out alone, every prayer she had made with one hand on the door she had given up believing would open. "Jin-ho," she said carefully, "I am 60 years old." "I know. You are 44. "I know. The world will have—" "I don't care about the world," he said, and he said it with the complete certainty of a man who runs half the world and therefore knows exactly what it's worth. "I have spent my entire life building things for an audience that will never be satisfied. I have made decisions based on what people would think and what was strategically optimal and what was appropriate. A pause. I don't want to be appropriate anymore. I want to be right, and you are the most right thing in my life. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright, not with tears, or not only with tears, with something larger. Ask me properly, she said. He stood up from his chair. He got down on one knee on the veranda of her small house in Lekki, Lagos, while Lagos sang its loud, irreverent song around them, and he took her hand. Adaeze Okonkwo, he said, you are the wisest person I have ever met, the strongest, the most genuinely kind. You make me want to be something I've never tried to be. I am asking you, with full understanding of everything I am and everything I've done and everything I cannot undo, to let me spend whatever time we have left building something that matters. With you. She looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. He pressed his forehead to her hand, and she felt the held breath release from him. Years and years of held breath. And something in her chest opened like a window into spring. The announcement went out on a Thursday. By Friday morning, it was everywhere. Korean Mafia boss Seo Jin-ho engaged to 60-year-old Nigerian architect. The internet did what the internet does. It exploded. The mocking came first, as it always does, fast and confident and certain. She must have something on him. She must have blackmailed him. He must be using her for visa reasons, for business reasons, for tax reasons. The comments on entertainment sites were vicious. Beauty influencers made videos wondering why a man of his resources would choose an old woman. Some Korean news outlets ran the story with photographs that had been selected to make Adaeze look as ordinary as possible. Someone on a popular Korean forum started a thread calculating the age gap and asking what kind of woman pursues a man 16 years younger than her. As though she had pursued him, as though the entire direction of pursuit had not been the opposite. His business partners reached out urgently. 3 board members of Seo Corporation's public subsidiaries requested emergency calls. His cousin in Seoul, who handled the family's more public-facing affairs, sent a message that was so carefully worded it took him 2 readings to understand that it was asking him to reconsider. His oldest associate, a man who had worked alongside Jin-ho for 12 years, called and said, "The optics are difficult. I hope you've thought this through." Jin-ho had responded to each of them with measured courtesy and entirely unchanged intention. One interviewer, live on a major Korean business channel, asked him directly, "Mr. Seo, the whole world wants to know, why? Why a 60-year-old woman? What does she have that your other options didn't?" And Seo Jin-ho, in front of a camera watched by 11 million people, went still and quiet in a way that made the interviewer shift in his seat. Then he said, "For 60 years, the world looked at her and saw what she didn't have. I looked at her and saw everything she was." The studio went silent. He continued, not loudly, not dramatically, with the complete quiet certainty of someone who has no need to perform conviction because they are simply describing something they know to be true. She is more intelligent than anyone I have ever sat across from in a boardroom. She is stronger than any person I have worked alongside in any context. She is loyal in a way I did not believe still existed in the world I operate in. She is kind, genuinely, structurally kind, in a way that has nothing to do with niceness and everything to do with character. And she makes me feel, for the first time in my adult life, that I am known. Not my power, not my resources, not my usefulness. A pause. The studio was so quiet you could have heard someone breathing at the back. Me. He looked directly into the camera. If the world cannot see what I see, the world is not paying attention, and that, frankly, is the world's loss. He stood up. He walked off the set. The clip went viral within 40 minutes. Not the soft kind of viral, the seismic kind, where entire demographics who have never cared about Korean business news or Nigerian architecture suddenly cared deeply and immediately. By Saturday, She's Everything She was trending on 3 continents. By Sunday, the narrative had completely flipped. Women over 50 were posting pictures of themselves with the caption. Young women who had watched their grandmothers be dismissed were posting videos in tears. A Kenyan journalist wrote a piece that was shared 4 million times. The most romantic thing said this century was said to a 60-year-old Nigerian woman. A Nigerian university professor wrote an essay about the medical misdiagnosis that had started everything. She had done her research, and the specific systemic way that careless medicine combined with community gossip had built a cage around a woman who deserved none of it. The essay was reprinted in 7 countries. Adaeze's firm received 47 new client inquiries in 1 week. Adaeze's phone had never received more messages in her life. She sat in her house and read them. Messages from women who were 58 and had given up. Women who were 49 and had been told they were too old. Women who were 35 and afraid. Women who were 63 and crying because they had watched themselves be overlooked for so long. They had started to believe it was simply the truth about who they were. Women who sent no words, just crying emojis and heart emojis and the specific digital shorthand of people whose feelings are too large for sentences. She put her phone down and sat very quietly. She thought of that cupcake, that one candle, that 60-year-old woman alone in her kitchen, watching a flame burn all the way down on its own. She thought of everything God had not answered in the years when she'd asked the most desperately, and all the times she had almost stopped asking, and the specific faithfulness that had kept her talking to him anyway. Not with hope exactly, but with the commitment of someone who has decided the conversation matters regardless of whether the reply comes. She picked her phone back up. She called Jin-ho. "Have you seen what's happening?" she asked. "Yes." "How are you feeling about it?" "Irritated that it took this long for the world to notice you," he said, otherwise unbothered. She laughed. Then she cried, very quietly into the phone. The kind of crying that has waited a long time and is therefore very specific in what it releases. Not sadness, or not only sadness, but years. He let her. He didn't rush her. He didn't say, "Don't cry." He simply stayed on the line, and the sound of him breathing was the most solid thing in the world. After a while, she said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me." A pause. Long and full. "Thank you for being worth seeing," he said. 2 weeks before the wedding, she told him the full story. Not the version she had given him over dinner. "I didn't find the right person." The full version. She sat across from him in her living room with her hands folded and her face very still, and she gave him all of it. The diagnosis at 25. The wrong diagnosis, as she had learned 15 years later from a different doctor who had looked at the original results and told her with visible distress that there had been a catastrophic misreading, that she had not been infertile, that the results had been misinterpreted, that she had likely always been capable of carrying children. 15 years too late. But also, nothing that had happened afterward could be undone by a correct diagnosis. The men had gone. The years had gone. The possibility of children had become, in her mind, not a wound but a scar. No longer actively painful, but always visible. She told him about Emmanuel and the second man and the third. She told him about the years of being treated as someone whose chapter had closed. She told him about the church women and the colleagues and the long accumulation of being looked at as a library, useful but not loved. She told him about the birthday, the cupcake, the single candle she had watched burn down on its own. Jin-ho listened to all of it without expression. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "The doctor who gave the original diagnosis," he said finally, "he's retired. Old. It was a different time, a different..." That's not what I was going to say. He looked at her. I was going to say that one man's carelessness rewrote your life. Yes, and yet you are... He stopped, started again. You are the most complete person I have ever met. She looked at him. I mean that precisely, he said. Not in a consolation way. I mean that there is nothing missing in you. You look at yourself and you see the gaps, the things that didn't happen, the people who didn't stay, the years that felt empty. I look at you and I see someone who filled every one of those gaps with herself, with her work and her strength and her wisdom and her particular impossible refusal to become bitter. He paused. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know what most people become when life does to them what life did to you? She blinked. I was bitter for a while. She said honestly, I know, but you chose your way back. He moved to sit next to her, took her hand. I need you to know something. I'm not choosing you because I feel sorry for what happened to you. I would not insult you with pity. I'm choosing you because of who you became, because of what happened. I'm choosing you because every beautiful thing about you was forged from all of it. He held her hand tightly. The world overlooked you for 60 years, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel overlooked again. She could not speak for a moment. That's a very large promise, she said finally, in a voice that was not entirely steady. I'm a very large person, he said, and she laughed, and he held her while she laughed, and they stayed like that for a long time, while Lagos moved and hummed around them. She told Jin-ho 6 weeks after the wedding. She had gone to the doctor for what she thought was fatigue. Reasonable, she told herself. Reasonable for a woman who had recently gotten married, moved between Lagos and Seoul for the wedding arrangements, overseen the completion of a major remediation project, and spent the better part of 4 months at the absolute center of a global media story she had never asked to be part of. Fatigue made complete and total sense. The doctor had run routine tests, then some additional tests, then some very specific tests with a specific expression on her face that made Adaeze's chest tighten slightly in a way she could not explain. The doctor had called her back the next morning. The doctor had asked her to come in person, which was the moment Adaeze understood that this was not a vitamin deficiency. She sat in the doctor's office in a chair that was slightly too hard and looked at a woman with 30 years of medical experience on her face and watched that woman struggle for the first time in what was clearly a long career to find the right words for something. Mrs. Seo, the doctor said finally, I want you to know that I have been practicing medicine for 28 years. I've seen things that I would have called impossible before I saw them. A pause. You are pregnant, approximately 8 weeks. The room did not end. The light continued to exist. The framed degrees on the wall remained framed. Everything was exactly as it had been 10 seconds before that sentence, and everything was completely, permanently, irreversibly different. She sat in her car in the hospital parking lot for 45 minutes. She did not call anyone. She did not cry. She sat with the information the way you sit with something enormous that has not yet become real, turning it over carefully, checking its edges, testing whether it would hold the weight of being believed. She thought about a government hospital in Lagos 35 years ago, a tired doctor, a catastrophic misreading of a test result, 7 words, your womb is irreparably damaged. I'm sorry. She thought about Emmanuel who had married someone else 6 months later, about the second man, about the third, about 35 years of men who had looked at the misdiagnosis and seen a liability. She thought about every prayer she had ever prayed that she had believed was going unanswered. Every I'm still here she had offered into what felt like silence. She thought about the cupcake, the one candle. She drove home. She sat in their home. Her home and Jin-ho's home now, the house in Lekki that had his books on her shelves and his Korean tea on her kitchen counter, and the particular settled feeling that a space develops when two people have decided to build their life in it. And she sat for 2 hours. Then she called him. "Come home," she said, "please." He was there in 20 minutes, which was not physically possible given where his office was, which meant he had been moving before she finished the sentence. He walked in and looked at her face. His own face did that thing it did when it was working to contain something large, a complete stillness, a focused quiet, every available resource redirected to receiving whatever was coming. "Tell me," he said. She put the papers on the table between them. He looked at them. He looked at her. He looked back at the papers. His hand moved toward them and stopped. "Adaeze." His voice was careful, every syllable placed with extraordinary care. "These say?" "Yes." "At 61. The doctor says it is medically extraordinary." She used the word unprecedented 3 times. She also said it is not impossible, that there is documented precedent, and that it is very early and there are no certainties, and there are decisions to be made. A pause. She was very thorough. He sat down slowly, across from her, at their kitchen table, in the house that now held both of their lives. He looked at her for a long time with that still, deep, entirely unreadable face, and then something moved in it. Not dramatically, not in a way a camera would have caught, but she had learned, over the months of knowing him, to read the small weather of him, and what moved across his face in that moment was wonder. Raw, unguarded, undefended wonder. "What do you want?" he asked, and that question, that one question, asked with no agenda, no pressure, no shadow of what he needed the answer to be, was perhaps the moment she loved him most completely. Not the proposal on her veranda, not the defense of her on global television. This, a man of extraordinary power making himself entirely small in order to make room for her answer. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I need time to feel this before I can think about what it means. I just knew that you were the first person I needed to tell." He stood up. He came around the table. He sat beside her, and he took both her hands in his and he held them. Not urgently, not possessively, but with the specific care of someone holding something that matters more than anything. "Whatever you need," he said, "whatever you decide, I am here. This is your story first. It has always been your story. I am here to be whatever you need me to be in it." He looked at her. "You are not alone. Whatever happens next, you are not alone." She leaned her forehead against his. The thing that had waited 35 years to arrive pressed against the walls of the present moment, like light pressing against a window. She thought, God did not forget me. He was waiting until I was ready to receive this properly. He was waiting until I had someone beside me who would hold it with me. He was waiting until the season was right. She thought, 60 years was not the punishment. It was the preparation. She thought, he knew what I didn't, that I needed to become the woman who could mother this child before the child arrived. Outside, Lagos was being Lagos, enormous and alive, and entirely indifferent to private miracles. Inside that house, something ancient and patient and completely extraordinary was happening. And for the first time in 61 years, Adaeze Okonkwo did not feel the need to brace herself against what was coming. She simply let it come. 3 years later, she stood in the doorway of their home in Lekki and watched Jin-ho in the garden. He was teaching their daughter to count in Korean. The little girl, Adana, which means father's daughter in Igbo, with a Korean middle name, Seo Jin-ho, meaning wisdom and grace, which had been Jin-ho's choice and which had made Adaeze cry for a full 10 minutes. was 2.5 years old, and had her father's extraordinary stillness in her eyes and her mother's magnificent locks beginning to form, and the most specific, imperious, slightly devastating personality that both of them privately found hilarious and slightly alarming. She was counting on her fingers in Korean, very seriously. Jin-ho was correcting her with the complete gravity he brought to everything. Then Adaeze got to 7 and held up all her fingers in entirely the wrong configuration and looked at her father with an expression that said, "I know this is wrong and I am unrepentant." And Jin-ho, Seo Jin-ho, the black sky, the man who had sat across from boardrooms full of formidable men without once blinking, lost his composure entirely and laughed. Full, real, unguarded laughter. Adaeze stood in the doorway and watched him laugh. She thought about a kitchen table with a cupcake and one candle burning down on its own. She thought about 35 years of wrong information that had built the architecture of her loneliness. She thought about every man who had not chosen her, and in choosing not to choose her, had cleared the path for the one who would. She thought about the particular stubbornness of God, the way he refuses your timeline and substitutes his own with the absolute confidence of someone who knows the ending when you are still terrified by the middle. She felt something rise in her chest that had no name in English or Igbo or Korean, but lived somewhere in the territory between gratitude and awe, and the specific joy of being entirely, overwhelmingly, impossibly seen. She walked into the garden. Jin-ho looked up when he heard her, and his face did that thing it always did when she came into a room. Not dramatic, not performed, just the slight softening of every line that meant you. Adaeze launched herself at her mother's legs with the full commitment of a 2-year-old who has not yet learned to moderate her enthusiasm. Adaeze picked her up, and the weight of her was the most real thing in the world. God remembered me at 60. She had sobbed on her wedding night into Jin-ho's shoulder, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming accumulation of joy. He had held her and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. He was right about that. Some truths live too large for language. Some stories only make sense in the final chapter, when you look back and see how every single thing, every year of loneliness, every wrong diagnosis, every man who left, every candle burned down alone, had been quietly, inexorably, building the person who was strong enough and wise enough and whole enough to be found by exactly the right one. In the garden, Adaeze reached up and grabbed her father's face with both hands and said something emphatic in the language of 2-year-olds, which is not really a language, but is completely understood by parents. Jin-ho answered her with absolute seriousness. Adaeze looked at the two of them, her impossible family, her impossible life, her impossible 61-year-old miracle, and thought, God did not forget me. He was just waiting until I was ready, until life had shaped me into exactly who I needed to be, until I was exactly, precisely, entirely myself. Because the man he was sending needed all of me, not the young version, not the unbroken version, not the version without the scars, all of me, the whole, weathered, wise, magnificent 60-year accumulation of all of me. She held her daughter in the Lagos afternoon. Her husband reached over and took her hand. The city sang, and Adaeze Okonkwo, who had once eaten a birthday cupcake alone and watched one candle burn down on its own, closed her eyes and let the fullness of it wash over her. Complete, chosen, home,